Okay, dear students and viewers, good morning. Once again, I have appeared before you in order to deliver a lecture. But this lecture is definitely having the specialty because it is not the single one. Please pay attention to the title of the lecture. How unique is Indian nation? But my students and viewers, I have to inform you, or rather remind you, that this lecture should not be viewed in separation from the first one lecture or the third one lecture which I am just likely to deliver in future. Once again, I have repeated the title for those audience who have not so far watched my first one lecture. The first one lecture is the composition of nationalism in as a whole in Western world. And the second one lecture is how unique is Indian nation. And my third lecture would be B.D. Savarkar and cultural nationalism in India. Now you can ask me the question, or you may be a bit curious, what has inspired me to deliver such a lecture on nationalism. These are the two things. The first one thing is nationalism is definitely the most powerful ideology starting from 19th century and continue up to the 21st century. Time and again, a number of rival ideologies emerged, and sometime even it was giving a hint it is going to swallow up nationalism within itself. For example, when Karl Marx gave a slogan in 1848 in his famous and illustrious Communist Manifesto, the workers of the world unite. So Karl Marx just tried to reject nationalism or, completely dismantle the nation state in the name of the world revolution. But Karl Marx died a broken-hearted man. Lenin tried to follow his path, but he has to start from Russia, a revolution, the communist revolution. And even at that time, Lenin didn't leave the hope, didn't discard the hope that time will come that this Russian revolution has to be transformed into a global revolution. And with this purpose, he even organized the so-called Communist International in order to, and with an objective to, you can say, propagate an ideology of world revolution and to influence the socialist and communist leaders from the different quarters of the world who are supposed to participate in this Congress from time to time. But he didn't get success, and his immediate successor Stalin had to make a compromise with nationalism, and then Soviet communism was converted into a strong Soviet empire based on nationalist values. Same happened in case of China and almost all the communist countries. So even communism belied the hope it could not dismantle the institution of nationalism. Later, you can say, when there was even Islam made a claim, even today Islam is fighting with the concept of nation state, because in Islam there is no concept of nation state. Islam, just like communism, had continuously thought in terms of a global system to convert Dar-ul Harb into Dar-ul Islam. Dar-ul Harb means the land of idolaters, and Dar-ul Islam where the Muslim laws, the Shariat laws had to prevail. But even it didn't get success, whether it may be Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. All Islamic countries had to make a compromise with the nation state. Likewise, and if you are just coming further, when globalization appeared, so my students and viewers, I am myself an eyewitness to globalization, particularly when it for the first time manifested in 1990s, and from 2000 onwards, the globalization became a very fashionable term in intellectual circle, and at that time, doomsayers were making a claim कि nation state is likely to dismantle now, but it didn't happen. The nation state swallow up globalization in itself, and today you can say that the ugly head of nationalism resurfaced, and globalization is simply in name. It is almost non-existent today, particularly after in post-pandemic era, So my friends and viewers, one point is that such a forceful ideology this is that every person, every student, and the people from all generations should know about this nationalism. This is my first objective. Second one objective is that in present scenario, a lot of controversy hovers around this term nationalism. Who is national? Who is foreigner? That has been a very, burning debate in political circle, and particularly nationalism became a part of political propaganda and narrative. Particularly the students and the youth from this new generation is easily falling into the trap of this distorted ideology of nationalism. So that's why I have brought this lecture in order to discuss and in order to convey to my audience that things are not viewed in black and white, in binary sense, because the things are too much complicated. Nationalism is a very dangerous ideology. It unifies and simultaneously divides. And there is a very thin line of demarcation between nationalism and communalism. And this line of demarcation is so thin that sometimes even we are not going to recognize when have you become a communal from national. It is very difficult to identify ourselves also whether we are a truly national or a communal. So keeping this thing in my mind, I have to give you the focus that India is not a normal nation. This is not the nation state in the sense of Western model, or you can say in the sense of a nation state which has remained to be fashionable in Western world. It is a very unique type of nation state. And very few people are paying attention to the phenomena that India was not simply a trendsetter in liberation movement when it has championed a great cause of non-violence, and particularly with Gandhian civil disobedience movement, it has given a new weapon into the hand of the oppressed people all over the world. This is definitely a greater contribution of India. But even this contribution is not less important. India became a template for newly independent ASU African countries, even in the field of nation building. India is a path breaker. So now, just observe this PDF PPT. I will just leave it. You can download it. I have already discussed this aspect with you. The model of nation building developed in Western Europe. Earlier, I have given to you the information that this model of nation building developed in Western Europe earlier. Then France emerged to be a modern nation state after the revolution. I have already discussed this aspect with you. Then essential condition for a nation was cultural uniformity. For the knowledge of this segment of the PPT or PDF, you are just suggested to move to my first one lecture. You will get there a clear-cut picture. Then come to the second one aspect. A spread of idea of nationalism and the emergence of Italy and Germany as modern nation states up to 1870s. Here I have given you the information that there was a time that there was the formation of nation state. In the first one lecture, I have just clarified this point. This nation state emerged in Western Europe first, then it gradually spread to Central Europe and South Europe. So earlier you can say Germany and Italy, which has first developed the idea of a nation, but it was in vehement search of the state. It led to some upheavals in Europe, but this unification of Italy and Germany became possible after up to 1870. So there was the rise of a new nation state in the form of Italy and Germany. But simultaneously, I have given to you the information. This is the third one. I have already discussed this aspect with you earlier in the first lecture. In the same nationalism, when just moved to Austrian Empire or Habsburg Empire in Central Europe, and Russian Empire and Ottoman Empire in Eastern Europe, so it has to face new challenges, because these empires were multiracial or multi-ethnic, you can say, multicultural, multi-religious, or multi-religious and multi-regional. So the concept of uniform nation state, or the concept of nation state based on cultural uniformity, was most unsuitable to such empires, and it created there the major upheavals leading to the conflict, war, and what you know as the Balkan question. So this aspect I have already discussed with you in the lecture number first. Now disintegration of Habsburg Empire, after disintegration, leave it here. This aspect has been further discussed. This is the very important point, because whenever you will pay attention to nation building in India, so come to view our national movement. In our national movement, you can say that Surendranath Banerjee has earlier given a term, and which has been very fashionable among Indian leaders throughout the national movement. And the term is what? The term is nation. India is a nation in making. We have not suddenly become a nation just after 15th August 1947 or 26 January 1950. In fact, on 15th August 1947, we are supposed to take the charge of our nation. Likewise, in 26 January 1950, we have to recognize the true nature of our nation, that is unity in diversity. But what you know as the whole process of unity in diversity, so this background was being prepared throughout the national movement itself. It was not the product of some accidental event or some sudden development. It was the product of a gradual evolution of at least 5 decades. So when our national movement was going on, so our national leaders, they were very conscious to even the global developments, and they were keeping their eyes over the developments outside of India. So they were much worried whenever they observed the whole process of Paris Peace Conference, because in Paris Peace Conference, when Wilson, American president, appeared there, and under his guidance, some new nations were created while dissolving the old Habsburg Empire, that was Austrian Empire. Because in Austrian Empire, I have told you that already the ethnic as well as the religious conflicts were going on, and linguistic minorities were making the claim, and they were demanding for their separate nation. This resulted into the Balkan question in Ottoman Empire and Habsburg Empire. And finally, this Balkan question led to the First World War. I am sorry, I am not going to give you the detailed information behind the background of the First World War. Simply, I am giving you some hint. So, as the First World War occurred, so it caught attention of the, important leaders as well as intellectuals all over the world. So, Wilson, who was leading USA and who was basically the main protagonist behind the peace program of the Paris Peace Conference. So he just appeared and he just came to Europe to attend this Paris Peace Conference, and he presented a different model, that is the Wilsonian 14-point program. And Wilson was convinced about the fact that if this 14 points program would be enforced, that will be introduced very honestly. So he believed that this First World War would prove the lasting war in Europe. So under this conviction, he advocated for dividing Austrian Empire and creating the new nation states, which you can very well observe here: Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, etc. So this development occurred in Europe. But why the event is equally important for us, for our Indian leaders? It is for the fact that Indian leaders were a bit, now anxious. They were a bit worried. Why worried? Because this Paris Peace Conference proved two things. The first one thing was that nation means the specific cultural, linguistic or ethnic identity. Means that deserves to be a nation which was having the specific or dominant linguistic, ethnic or racial or religious identity. So this was proved. And the second one factor was that in order to make ourselves as a nation, we need some international sanction, which happened in Paris Peace Conference. It was the European Congress which recognized the new nation states. So it was really a big challenge for us. Here I have informed you about the Paris Peace Conference. From here you can take the data. Then India had to face the challenge of the definition of nationhood on Western parameters. Two main challenges were. A basic problem before us was that on criteria of nation state championed by Western leaders and Western intellectuals, we were not supposed to qualify. We could not qualify on the parameters of the nation state which had been established by the Western political leaders and the Western governments. Why? Our Indian nation was having the two important specialties, so pay attention to it. Point first, India was having a continental size. Although we belong to a subcontinent, but it was having a continental size. If you are going to separate the Russian part of Europe, so at that time the unified India was almost equivalent in size to Europe. So you can very well imagine that we are having a continental size. The second one, it was multiracial, multilingual and multi-regional in nature, so it could not qualify the criteria set by Western model. We were multiracial, multilingual, multi-regional, and the multi-religious. We could not qualify as a nation on Western parameters. Here I have to give you the very interesting information. Whenever we were thinking in terms of being a nation, so some Western political leaders and scholars, they were simply exposing us. They were simply making mockery of our national identity. Here we can cite certain names. The first one is John Strachey. John Strachey was a British officer and he worked in India up to 1880 or 1889, and then he returned to London. And while returning to London, he became an expert on India. He delivered a lecture at Cambridge in 1890, and later his lecture has been compiled in the form of a book. The name of the book is India. So in this lecture, he made this point clear. India is not a nation. It can never be. India is the community of nations. It is just like Europe. There is more difference between Punjabi and Bengali in India. What difference you find in Europe between Portugali and Scottish? So in this way, he tried to prove that India is not deserving to be a nation because it was multiracial, multilingual, multi-religious, so it could never become a nation in European sense. Not simply that, you have cited the example of Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling is the very famous character. I think you people will possibly, you may be familiar with Rudyard Kipling. It was same Rudyard Kipling, the English poet, who has written a lot on India. His views were India-centric, but he was anti-Indian and he was basically propagating the Western racialism. It was the same Rudyard Kipling who has propounded and who has just given the theory of Weizmann burden. You may be familiar with Weizmann burden theory. So Rudyard Kipling at that time went to Australian continent. So some of the journalists just asked him, Mr. Kipling, please tell me one thing. Are you people ready to give India the self-government? So Kipling very pessimistically replied, no. India is a 4,000-old civilization. It can learn nothing. It can learn nothing new. India simply requires the better law and order condition, and we are ready here to give it. Otherwise, India does not need anything, and it does not deserve to be a republic or a democracy. So in this way, you can say even he dismissed the idea of self-government for India. Churchill, the British Prime Minister, he has even gone to the extent, he declared that India is a nation, India is just like a geographical expression. The same term has been just, coined by a 19th century Austrian Prime Minister. You might have heard the name Prince Metternich for Italy. The same term has been coined by the British Prime Minister Churchill for India. So this was the case. Now we have to accept the challenge. Here I have given you the name of the challenges which India has to face. But in course of the national movement, my students, gradually we are going to make a compromise and we are going to make a tryst with our cultural diversities. In course of the national movement, our leaders, and our leaders not simply our leaders from North India, from South India, from Eastern India, they were very conscious about the fact that India had to make a compromise with its cultural diversities, and it has to create itself as a nation. Here I have to inform you, in fact, at that time, there was no substitute to nation. I think in post nation state era, or you can say the time when the nation state came into existence up to the, you can say, 19th century. So after 19th century, whichever nation has to be created, whichever state has to be created or an independent state has to be created. So we are not having other model than a nation state. Means other than nation state, no model was available. So we are supposed to be a nation state only. This was the case. But how was it possible? Because it is just like the thing, one fit for all size, it was not possible. Western Europe has evolved it, and now in the same manner it was not to be applied to the different parts of the world. So whenever the national movement was going on, so here I have to make you clear how did we make the compromise. Just leave it. Now, finally coming to this point, before the independence, India was having three different models of the nation: French unitary model, American federal model, and Canadian federal model. Now, my students' point is that not to speak of the nation state in Western Europe. It was more culturally unified, it was more culturally uniform, and whenever it moved to Central Europe and Eastern Europe, it took some other form I have discussed with you. So the question arises that some other models were also available to us. In French model, which developed this nation, so Yogendra Yadav has used the term nation state. Nation state means you have already, you can say, developed a cultural uniformity, and then you have just tried to, a uniform cultural identity in whole of your state. So it was called nation state. Yogendra Yadav prefers to call it nation state. Other term is state nation. State nation means you are culturally diversified, and then you are going to create your nation while making the compromise among the different cultural groups or the different linguistic groups, the different regional groups. So there are the two options before us. Either we have been nation first, then we have become the nation state, or we are simply a state and we have to evolve as a nation while making compromises and counter compromises. So the thing is very clear, we should belong to the second one category, because the option of the first category was not open for us. We are already multiracial, multilingual, multicultural. You can say the multi-religious. So we could not qualify on the first criteria. So leave it the French model. French model was completely closed to us. But question arises, we are talking about the cultural diversities. Here also you will find the two different models of cultural diversities. One model is that the diverse cultural groups are diffused to the different part of a state or an empire or a big state. The different cultural groups were, you can say, diffused in different parts, and they were settled in different parts. Or even you can find the case that a specific regional, cultural, linguistic or whatever group, so they were just clubbed together into a particular region. Means that a particular region is being peopled by a different cultural group. This can also be case. So that's why on that basis here we have presented the two different models. One is the American federal model and second one is the Canadian federal model. Why? What is the difference between the two? In American federal model, you can say America in USA, when it was a federation was created, so there was diversities, the regional diversity and various types of diversities, but not as diverse as India, but still diversities were there. But the diverse groups were distributed, you can say, evenly almost in the different parts of USA. The same case was in Switzerland also. There was definitely diversities, but the diverse groups were, rationally distributed in different parts. So there the states were created. So in those regions, the states were having the equal rights and they were having the common relations with the center. Means that there was no difference between the state and state in the matter of rights, and even the rights between the single one state and the center, it was uniform in case of all the states. You will not find there the case. Here I am giving the practical example or the concrete example. Suppose some state was not enjoying more power than other states. It was the case of USA, Switzerland, etc. But whenever you will just move to Canada, about whom I will give you the example, there possibly in 1867, Canada has to be, earlier it was a colony and it has to be gradually developed into a federation under the guidance of Britain itself. So their basic problem was that Quebec was a region and Quebec was having a separate sense of identity, and it also started to demand separation. So as it started to demand separation, so there a new method has been devised, and the new method was that Quebec should be given a separate status than other states. So my students and viewers, here the two terms have been coined, which I am going to use in future. So here I have to educate you about the two different models of federalism. One is called symmetrical model. Symmetrical model is the term which has been given in context of USA and Switzerland. Another is asymmetrical model. Asymmetrical model means, asymmetrical means that is in Hindi Samangi Shang and Vismangi Shang. Means that they are in asymmetrical model means you are giving more right to the specific states or a single one state than other states. So this is the different type of compromise. You will find the example in context of Canada. Now, in the light of the above ideas, you have to move further. There was an example of three different types of nations before India. Here also I have just same thing I have repeated in the more clear form. The concept of the nation and the state is the same. That is the case of France. There is no difference between the nation. State means the physical unity. The physical entity, and nation is the concept. So when you have decided that we are having the cultural uniformity, and in your state almost all the groups and almost all the people are going to accept these cultural values, the common cultural values. So here you will find the correspondence, the proper correspondence between the nation and the state. Means that you have become a nation first and then you have converted yourself into a nation state. Second one example is such a nation which is culturally diverse, but there is no territory-based minority or linguistic group with the demand of autonomy and separation, for example, USA, Switzerland, etc. So I have already discussed with you. even USA and Switzerland were diverse, but there no specific group was demanding for separation. So they were not facing the crisis of division or separation. So that's why, because the different or diverse socio-cultural groups were evenly divided within the empire. So this is the second one example which I have already discussed with you. The third one example is such a nation which is not simply culturally diverse, but the specific territory-based minority group with the demand of autonomy or separation among 11 federal states, Canada, India, Spain, Belgium are examples. Just wait, I have simply discussed about Canada so far. But now I will inform you even India and after India, two other nations as well, Spain as well as Belgium. Even these three nations, these three state nations have followed the same method of Canada, and today you will find at least four nations or four federations are such whom you prefer to call asymmetrical federalism. Canada, India, Spain and Belgium, which I will discuss with you later. And total number of federations are 11. The four are very unique type of federation. Here Canada, this is Quebec. This is Quebec in Canada. It was enjoying the different status. Then I will just discuss about. Now, my students and viewers, here I have to inform you that in course of national movement, our leaders were working for making India a nation. They gradually even started to recognize their linguistic diversities because you know that Gandhi was coming from Gujarat, Chakravarti Rajgopalachari from Tamil Nadu, and many leaders from Bengal who were from non-Hindi states, you know. So even these leaders were equally demanding for the Hindi language as a national language. It was a very big thing at that time. But simultaneously, they were conscious about the fact that even the regional languages were given the due status and due respect. So from 2021 onwards, the Congress in its annual session started to use the regional language as its official language in the session. For example, if the session is going on in Andhra Pradesh, so Telugu, all the works of the session and all the conversation and all the documents had to be prepared in Telugu. If in Bengal, so in Bengali, in Gujarat, Gujarati. So in this way, the regional languages were given the due, and our leaders were even conscious about the fact that under the British rule, the states were created. So they were basically created in interest of the British colonial interest, and these were the presidency states like Madras Presidency, Punjab Presidency, Bengal Presidency. So in this Bombay Presidency, so they just came to realize that in future, whenever India would get freedom, so then we have to give due respect and due weightage to the linguistic identity, and the state had to be created on the basis of linguistic identity. But they were keeping and they were possibly noticing the ambition at least Hindi would remain to be a national language. Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. This was an ideology which was guiding too many leaders at that time, you can say. So this was the case. And likewise, you can say in the matter of religion, almost all the leaders were pursuing the policy of secularism. Some critics were just blaming Gandhi. Gandhi was just taking a tilt in favor of Hinduism, but it was definitely you can say the baseless charge on Gandhi, because Gandhi was basically having a different perception about religion. According to Gandhi, we are not having any sort of contradiction between our religious, our caste, our religious, our caste, our regional identity and the national identity. Both are complementary to each other. If we belong to Indian nation, it does not mean that we are not a Hindu, we are not a Muslim, we are not a Brahmin, we are not a Sudra. It hardly matters. We are Indian, this is the top identity, and under this Indian identity, we should be given the freedom to preserve our regional and different types of identity. Both are not going to be antithetical to each other. So this was the perception of Gandhi. So, and not to speak of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and many other leaders who were westernized in their temperament. So they were almost influenced by the Western model of secularism. So secularism was being promoted from the earlier period onwards. So not on the basis of linguistic. As for the regional diversities, we have already recognized it right from the very beginning. Indian National Congress used to organize its annual session in different parts of India, keeping the view of the representation of different regions. So we just try to dilute our regional diversities, linguistic diversities, religious diversities in course of the national movement itself. So that's why India was supposed to be, or national movement of India is supposed to be nation in making also. But you know, but still we are supposed to face a tragedy, a big tragedy. We became partial failure because we got independence, we got freedom, but we have to face the condition of or situation of partition as well. So it was quite frustrating for us. And here we are not having the sufficient time to discuss or to shift the blame on any specific group which was accountable behind the partition, because it was a matter of long debate which I am avoiding here because I am having another agenda to prove. So here the point is, India faced the condition of partition but independence as well. On 15th August, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru has given a famous or delivered a famous speech. It tries with destiny. So on 15th August onwards, we have to make a tryst with our destiny. And bigger challenge is nation building, because we have become partial free on 15th of August, and true freedom was possible whenever you will preserve India as a nation, because we are facing so many challenges from Western thinkers. You can surprised to know that, not to speak of in 1947, even in 1969, whenever we have already crossed the 2 decades of our national life and we have already performed successfully the 4 elections, but still there was a British journalist, although he was sympathetic to India. His name was Don Taylor. So he made a statement, Don Taylor, I don't know India will survive or not. My heart wishes if it could have survived, but our mind is not going to accept this. This was the perception. For Western scholars, India was a mystery. Indian nation was a mystery. How was it possible? But how have you moved in this direction? Just observe here. Asymmetrical federalism. At the time of our independence, the northeast states, Kashmir, even Tamil Nadu, which was demanding for Darwistan, so they were talking in terms of separation. So here we have made a very pragmatic compromise. And we didn't accept the American model of federalism. Rather, we accepted the Canadian model of federalism. That is asymmetrical federalism. Means we have in Article 370, we accepted the special status for Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. And in Article 371, we have given some special identity to too many states from A to G. So Article 370 and that of 371 are examples ki how did we make a compromise on the front of federalism, and we have accepted there the another model of federalism, and that is asymmetrical federalism. Here it is at this point I have to inform you, first Canada, then India, and then later in 1970 you will come to know that some other states also accepted this. Here you find the example of Spain. This was Spain. So Actually, Spain is having a different story because there was a fascist government under General Franco for a long time. But after General Franco, when he died, so Spain accepted another sort of model because there is this place you find here. Even recent some years back, it was in news. This region is Catalonia. So Catalonia has been demanding for a separate identity, or you can say it was even started to think in terms of a separate nation. And the almost same happened in case of the Basque country. This was the Basque country. So as they started to think in terms of separation, so Spanish government or the government of Spain made a compromise here. Even Spain accepted asymmetrical federalism in 1970s. The same happened in case of Belgium. The same happened in case of Belgium, you can say Flanders, Brussels, and Wallonia. So there was also the same question of separation. So even this had accepted the model of asymmetrical federalism. It was given a separate status in Belgium. It was a very different thing and the different type of experiment. Here, my students, I have to inform you that we have already done the experiments before the Western countries. Spain was coming from and Belgium. Both are the two models of nation, the earliest nation in Western Europe. But later they were compelled to follow our method. Means our method worked very successfully. We have already made asymmetrical federalism. So this is the case here. And then this was the one step we have taken. Second one, official language policy, English along with Hindi as a supportive official language. It is having an interesting story for my students and viewers. In fact, earlier our national leaders were too much enthusiastic to declare Hindi as a national language. In India, it is true, the majority of people were the Hindi speaking people, nearly 40.2%. So they hoped that Hindi would be the national language after independence. And in course of the national movement, even the leaders were equally enthusiastic from the different quarters, from Bengal, from Gujarat, from Tamil Nadu. They were from the non-Hindi speaking regions. So they were not having any objection, rather they were enthusiastically supporting the cause. But after independence, when the process of nation building started, so here you can say the pressure was built on the leader by the people. In case of Chhatrapati Rajagopalachari, there was a party, Periyar Nayakar's party, and later you can say this party was known as Dravir Munnetra Kazhagam. So they started a movement there in favor of Tamil as a language and the separate identity of Tamil. So question arises here because now you can say language was a very sensitive issue. It was important for reserving and getting the government jobs. It can open your career in the government jobs or any other jobs you can say. So they were not ready to make a compromise on language issue. So our Constituent Assembly has to face this situation of language. Even in NCERT class 12, you will go through the last one chapter. You will find there what a challenge was in Constituent Assembly, because a lot of leaders from Hindi belt were enthusiastically tried to establish Hindi as the national language, but simultaneously the protests were coming from the side of the non-Hindi belt and the non-Hindi regions, and the leaders were opposing there. So this was the case here. So finally we have made a compromise in 1951. For 15 years, the Hindi will be the official language of India, and English will remain there as the supportive official language for 15 years. But when the time was likely to be elapsed, so 2 years back in 1963, once again a movement started in Tamil Nadu, and finally the Nehru's government has to make a compromise. Hindi would be in 1963, the government has taken the decision that Hindi will be the official language and English as supportive official language in future for indefinite period. The period was not specified. It was left, and it was just, you can say, this matter was just shifted on the head of the future generation. In the future generation will take the decision what will happen to Hindi and what to other language. So this was the case earlier, you find. So official language. Now the next one issue was provision of citizenship. Her provision of citizenship, it was one of the most disputed issues in Constituent Assembly. For that, you are supposed to recall the events at the time of partition. Just try to recall. When the partition occurred, so I think some of my students and audience may not be familiar with the phenomena. In fact, the transfer of population between India and Pakistan, it was not the part of the agenda of partition. Rather, it was decided that both the governments, the Indian government and Pakistani government, would give protection to minority groups. This was the case. But this unforeseen situation appeared on 15th of August again, although the first spat of rights were almost came to close up to before 15th of August. But in 15th of August, the fresh spat of rights started from Punjab, and it took the very ugly turn. So in the environment of mutual hatred, fear, you can say trauma, the attack and counter-attack, finally there was the migration of population between the two countries. So question arose that whenever our constitution makers, they were working in Constituent Assembly on the matter of and on the issue of citizenship, earlier they developed the idea of just solely. Just solely means that those who have been born on this soil, those who were born on this soil. So this is concept of just solely. And the second one factor is just sanguineous. Just sanguineous means that the people from the blood relations should given and offered the status of citizen or should be offered citizenship. So actually earlier our leaders didn't accept the principle of just sanguineous. They accepted the principle of just solely, and this principle of just solely is the basic feature of a civilized society. Those who are on the land of India at the time of independence, so they will be given the status of citizen. But as the result of this rights and population migration, nearly 5 lakhs Hindus and Sikhs who were ejected from Pakistan as the result of the rights. So they moved towards India, and not simply 5 lakhs, the total number was 1 crore 40 lakhs in, you can say, entry and exit total. But maybe 50 crores, 60 crores, etc. But at least at least you can say, the 5 lakhs were sitting in Delhi itself, under the very nose of Constituent Assembly. Earlier, the government decided that it was a very ugly turn and that could be removed. So earlier it was decided that no, refugees will be persuaded to return Pakistan from India, and those refugees which have already, these refugees had to return to Pakistan after signing some pact with Pakistani government, when the government promised to give them the proper security and security. And likewise, those refugees who just fled from India to Pakistan, they should be taken back and they should be restored on their parental property. So this was the earlier plan. But when the refugees from Pakistan came to India, so they already seized the property of those refugees who had already fled to Pakistan. So Indian government was helpless because the property was already occupied. Sorry. So there was not the scope to take back the old refugees which had already fled from India to Pakistan. So this was going to influence the nature of citizenship in India. And gradually you have to move from just solely to just sanguineous. Vallabhbhai Patel wrote a letter to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ki Pandit ji, situation has become out of control. The refugees from Pakistan have already occupied the property. Now there is such intense communal hatred in India, it is not practically possible to eject those occupiers from the property. Otherwise, it will create the wider communal tensions in India and the image of government would be tarnished. Even Jawaharlal Nehru accepted this and he came to realize that Vallabhbhai Patel is 100% right on this ground. So in new citizenship clause, there was a provision that those people who have returned from, those people who are in India before 19th July 1948. 19th July 1948, here I have to inform you, just 1 minute. In fact, at the first aspect of Hindu-Muslim rights started in March 1946, when the riots first erupted in Punjab in March 1946, much earlier than freedom. And as Jinnah and Muslim League had making a continuous propaganda in favor of Pakistan, ki Pakistan would be heaven for Muslims. So some Muslims from Pakistan, having been attracted to the new heaven of Muslims, they moved to Pakistan. But after going there, they came to realize that this was not the Pakistan they had earlier thought to be. So they were planning to return from Pakistan to India. In the meantime, many refugees came to India and occupied their property. So Indian government was helpless at that a new provision in citizenship, on 19th July 1948, those who have just came to India up to 19th July 1948, so they would be given the citizenship easily. But after 19th July, whosoever is planning to come to India, so they are supposed to take permission from Indian government. So a line of demarcation was drawn between 19th July, before 19th July and after 19th July. It means you have accepted the Sikhs and Hindus, refugees as the citizen on the basis of the principle of jus sanguinis, and we have rejected the theory of jus soli partially. So it was going to affect our citizenship clause. Not simply that, my friends, the citizenship issue became one of the most contentious issues before the Constituent Assembly. Constituent Assembly, till the enforcement of Constitution, could not solve this issue. So it was in 1955, while legislating a law on citizenship only in 1955, anyhow this matter could have been solved partially. But still it became a bleeding wound in Indian situation. So that's why in 2014 there was a, big controversy. And not simply that, even in 2019 and 20, you have just come to observe the NRC and CAA controversy. So all are just related to the citizenship, and that was lying in nation building itself. To postpone uniform civil code for future. Here also we have made a major compromise. The first generation of leadership is being criticized, but they definitely shown their courage not to accept the uniform civil code, So that was definitely a major step in this regard. And creation of linguistic states. What is the creation of linguistic states, Earlier, the Congress leaders in course of the national movement, they just, encouraged the linguistic aspiration of the people from different groups while giving the promise. After exit of the British, this presidency states has to be reorganized on linguistic basis. So they definitely encouraged and aroused their hope. But after independence, as India had to face partition along with independence, so now their mind was going to change. They developed a sense of anxiety in this regard. Possibly the creation of linguistic state would encourage a policy or encourage a tendency of son of soil. मिट्टी के लाल की भावना लोगों में पैदा होगी, अलगाववाद आएगा. So this was the such perception prevailing among the leaders. So that's why the government retracted and from the earlier promise, and they didn't become ready to accept this new, the old principle of linguistic states. So this was the case finally, But as the aspiration of the people was rising day by day in favor of linguistic state, so a full-fledged movement started in Andhra region. in the Telugu speaking people for the creation of a separate state for them. There was the formation of certain committees earlier. First one committee was the Dar Committee in 1948. This committee came to view this issue, but this committee clearly rejected no, linguistic state is not possible. That will definitely weaken the unity and integrity of India. But movement, once again, you can say this movement became more intense. So there was the formation of another committee under Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel. So it was known as Jvp Committee. So this Jvp Committee tried to establish that no, this linguistic state is not suitable for Indian condition. It could hamper the unity. So even JVP committee rejected the demand of linguistic state. Finally, you can say the movement in Andhra or Telugu speaking region became so intense that there was a Gandhian Satyagrahi, his name was Sri Ram Lu. He went on the fast unto death and he really died. And this created there a revolution-like situation. So central government came under the pressure, and finally in 1953, this Andhra or Telugu speaking region was given the status of a separate state, and it became the first linguistic state. Then once again a state reorganization commission was formed in order to view over the nature of a state. Although the state reorganization commission was not fully satisfied to create linguistic state, but at least it accepted. So at its recommendation, there was the creation of 14 states on linguistic basis and 6 union territory. So this was the case, Now this problem was solved. Earlier it was apprehended. It might have encouraged a feeling of the son of soil. But this sort of apprehension was simply belied in course of time, and it was widely realized and it was accepted and it was felt no, this was not the case in India. Rather, this creation of linguistic state satisfied the cultural aspiration of the different regions and the states. So it made a positive contribution to the unity and integrity of India. Initially, because it was the creation of a federation in India, and just after independence, you can say some sort of mutual distrust was prevailing between the center and the states. Both were just conscious about their rights. So if initially the Indian or central government could have rejected forcefully their demand, so it might have encouraged the separatist tendencies among the states. Rather, when their demand and genuine demand was accepted, so their sense of, you can say, self-respect was satisfied, and it strengthened the unity and integrity of India. If you have to give the example, so for taking the example, you are not going to go further. You will find your example in your neighborhood. Take the case of Bangladesh. Pakistan was a nation built on the basis of religion. You will be surprised to know that Pakistan is having the specialty in that sense. After Israel, Pakistan was the first nation in the world which has been constituted on the basis of religion. But it broke to two parts. It broke in two parts. It was divided or partitioned, and there was the creation of an independent Bangladesh on linguistic issue. Just after independence, you will come to know that Pakistan, the West Pakistan, was just accepted Urdu as official language, and West Pakistan was championing the cause of Urdu, and Eastern Pakistan was using the language Bangla, and they were having much fascination for Bangla language, Amar Sonar Bangla. So basically this linguistic identity which created the cleavage. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, just after independence or the freedom, they just visited Eastern Pakistan, and while addressing the people, he made this point crystal clear: as soon as you will learn Urdu language, that is better for you. Very well, you can understand that what was the perception at that time. And finally, it was partitioned on linguistic issue. So it was a victory of culture on religion. Take the case of Sri Lanka. If everything could have been okay. Sri Lanka could have been the richest state in South Asia. Its per capita income is still larger. But it has committed a major mistake. You will be surprised to know that at the time of independence, the Tamils of India were having a separatist tendency when they were demanding about Darvistan. And Sri Lankan Tamils were satisfied. They were making contribution to the nation building. But just, you can say, both the nations went into opposite direction. Sri Lanka was fallen into a civil war, and India could develop itself as a unified, India could develop itself as the very, a strong, unified nation. How was it possible? Due to its policy, you can say. So here you can cite the example. Up now, the provisions of fundamental rights for religious, linguistic and cultural minorities. A question arises that you have to make a compromise with your linguistic and religious diversity, which we have done. And particularly in fundamental rights, we have given the specific rights to minority communities. From Article 25 to 28, the rights were reserved for religious minority, and in Article 29 to 30, the specific identity has been, specific rights were accepted for linguistic minority group. We have already brought this provision in order to satisfy our minority group, and then to adopt secular policy. Our secular policy is enshrined in our constitution. You people may very well know, although Mrs. Gandhi didn't take risk and she consciously introduced and expressively introduced the term like socialist and secular through a constitutional amendment that is known as 42nd Constitutional Amendment. But my students, for your kind information, even earlier, secularism or the basic essence of secularism is lying in our preamble itself, even earlier. You find that the term liberty, equality and fraternity. So, liberty in the sense that Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar had specified the term. You are talking about liberty, but without equality, liberty cannot exist. Because if you give liberty but not equality, so the liberty would mean for a few people, and it was the few people, which will crush the liberty of the others. But simultaneously, if you will provide the equality to the people but not liberty, so that will kill the individual initiative, that will kill the basic initiative from the side of the people. What happened in case of Soviet Russia? There comes the term of brotherhood. Without brotherhood, neither liberty can survive, neither equality can survive. Equality means you are just providing the equal, not complete equal, but at least tolerable economic condition for the people. Only then they can preserve their liberty. Brotherhood means so far as the community is not going to accept the basic rights of the people, how can the right be enforced? Bhimrao Ambedkar clearly mentioned that then you will require a police standing there to protect the rights of the people. Was it possible? At that time the 70 and 80 crore people, and today you can say 130 crore people should be given the protection by the police. So the community has to accept the right in the easy term. And liberty, if you have given the liberty, you have given the equality, and the fraternity or community is going to accept this. So here the secularism is naturally there. We are in liberty, we are having the right to follow the religion and the sect I like. And equality means that if you will enjoy the right to pursue your religion, I am also right to pursue my own religion. You will not intervene into my matter of religion. So secularism was already lying there, but later it was expressively mentioned in our constitution. So India became a unique nation. Here I have to inform you that Sunil Khilnani, he has composed a text much earlier. I have just gone through this text, although in 2000, but he wrote this text in 1997 itself. So Sunil Khilnani, The Idea of India. The Idea of India is a very important text. The different versions have come so far, the different editions, So in Idea of India, Sunil Khilnani has used a very important term. And what is the term I have to make you clear? That is use the term कि third movement in democratic revolution. Third movement in democratic revolution. Third movement in democratic revolution, why? So he has specified the first movement in American Revolution in 18th century. Then second movement, the French Revolution in 18th century. But he came to believe that these revolutions have championed the cause of democracy in Western world, not in colonies. But after Second World War, India was the first colony to be liberated. So India has to be path breaker. And India developed its democratic model. So Yogendra Yadav has used a very apt term for that. You can use this term anywhere. India is given the credit to have democratized the idea of democracy. India is given the credit to have democratized the idea of democracy. इंडिया ने डेमोक्रेसी के आइडिया को ही डेमोक्रेटाइज कर दिया, मतलब प्रजातंत्र के विचार का प्रजातांत्रिकरण किया. मीन्स कि इट वॉज इंडिया. फॉर एग्जाम्पल यू कैन से Marxism was confined to Europe only. But Mao Zedong of China just made Marxism relevant in Asia. So India made democracy available to third world countries. Here I have given you the point. And the point is, India didn't simply give an alternative path of national movement, but also of nation building. And whenever we compare India with the contemporary South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, the success of India is clearly visible. Means ki, one thing, my students, I have told you earlier, ki this nationalism unifies and nationalism simultaneously divides. So the basic problem was that whether India has to survive or not. India proved it. And for your information, it was just like a double-edged sword. उसको हिंदी में बोलते हैं दो धारी तलवार, जो सामने वाले को भी काटता है और चलाने वाले को भी काटता है. So basic problem was that कि wherever from Western Europe to other areas where nationalism and nation state traveled, so this nation building almost became a refugee generating process. Refugee generating process means you just try to, you can say, create a nation on Western model, but you were multiracial, multilingual, and you are having the cultural diversities. You try to create a uniform code for all. So they were not going to accept this. It took the form of a civil war, human tragedies, migration of population, so that became the common feature of nation building, but India could save itself. Not to speak of partition. It was definitely a big tragedy in the history of nationalism in India, but it was for that a lot of factors were accountable: national, international, colonial power, opportunistic politics. So no other single one, but still you can say even after the first one partition, on the basis of religion, Pakistan was created as a nation, but we have not accepted religion. How many types of nations can we? So Shashi Tharoor has classified the nation into 9 groups. There should be the 9 types of nations. Some of them are ethnic nation, you know, Germany, Italy, that is based on ethnic nation, German, Italian. Then linguistic nation, Bangladesh is the example of linguistic nation. Then you can say territorial nation, that is the common name. Territorial nation, you know, religious nation, firstly Israel and then Pakistan. And religious nationalism. And then comes the term of, you know, diaspora nationalism. Even Israel and Sri Lanka, diaspora means ki the Tamil nation. If in future the Tamil nation would be created, it will be the example of diaspora nationalism also, apart from linguistic nationalism, you can say. So likewise, many types: revolutionary nationalism, anti-colonial nationalism, and one is civic nationalism. In civic nationalism is supposed to be most suitable to the culturally diversified, racially diversified, ethnically diversified country. The civic nationalism, in civic nationalism means that we are, although having the different cultural identities, but for the sake of a common national cause, we are going to create certain institutions that will not make any distinction among different cultural groups on the basis of their identity. So such nation is supposed to be durable, which India proved. The time Pakistan was created and India created, so many Western scholars were taking Pakistan as the durable nation, and India, a nation which has to face its multiple fractures in future. But fortunately, even after the enforcement of constitution, India could survive more than 7 decades, but Pakistan had to face the partition within 30 years of its national life. So this is the case, means कि nation building is the very, very subtle thing. Now in the next one lecture, I have to make you clear that some were championing the cause that India should be a Hindu nation. But if you are going to declare India a Hindu nation, so what problem we can face in future and what problem we can. So here the point is, that's why, and second one is that V.D. Savarkar is supposed to be a great national personality, and he is also given the credit to have championed the alternative cause of nation building, and he was having the alternative model of nation. So what is the alternative model of nation of V.D. Savarkar? And what is the concept of his culture nationalism? So that will be the part of my third lecture from this trilogy. So my students, I'll see you in the third one lecture again. Thank you very much. I'll see you.